Hello and welcome to the Big League Show. Once again, I'm Connor Somerville, joined by Aiden Cellophant, and today our guest is none other than Daniel Janicas. But before we get to Daniel, I think we need to address the hairstyle in the room and the fact that Aiden and I have both gotten haircuts. Uh, Obviously, now we can get haircuts. It's open again, so we've enjoyed that luxury. Daniel has not been quite so lucky. He's still rocking the flow. So Daniel, how are you doing with the quarantine trim?
Well, first off, thanks for inviting me. And the quarantine trim, no luck yet, but that will be coming sometime next week. But like you said, the flow is rocking hard, and it's been pretty good, so can't complain.
You're lucky to have that hair. So I don't think there should be bad luck because you haven't gotten a haircut. You should be lucky that you have that kind of hair.
Thanks. A lot of people have been telling me that.
Yeah, you could be stuck with my hair, and that is not a good situation. But off of hair, let's get into the actual podcast because we're in a small rush in the fact that we're recording this a little later than we usually do. And tonight is the MLS. That is finally returning following the 4 month hiatus after having to cancel games due to COVID. And Orlando, Miami kick off in an hour and a half-ish. But that won't affect this podcast. If we go long, we go long. Recording is a wonderful tool on TVs, so I may have to take advantage of it. But, Daniel, let's get into a bit about who you are.
Sure.
Let's start early. And I want to know, when did you sort of become interested in sports and then interested in sport media? Did that come around the same time, or was that sort of a separate interest for you?
I think the two dates for those two categories were different. In terms of getting into sports, I got into sports at a pretty young age in terms of fandom and even playing, whether it was playing hockey or soccer, which were two sports I had the privilege of playing growing up. So I would say that I got into sports at a pretty young age, around the age of 7, 8. And in terms of sport media, I didn't get into that until later, until university, until some of the writing that I do and that I did and still do took off and opened up other avenues that allowed me to get into this program and switch from the business program that I was previously in at Ryerson.
What do you think throughout your childhood kind of inspired you to maybe make that switch from the business to sport media? Did something influence you in some way throughout your childhood that led you to sports? Is it, what sports did you play growing up? Was it something like that, or was it a team that you liked? What kind of drew you into the sports industry?
Well, I think what drew me into specifically this program in the sports media industry um, had to do more with my writing with Florida rather than, early age fandom for sports. I think that really had a big influence on me making the switch from business to sports media. If I can tell a little story, actually, it basically goes like this. I started writing for a blog. It's called The Rat Trick. It's powered by Fansided, which I'm sure a lot of people in this industry and even in this program, for lack of better words, know of, right, in terms of writing, a good writing platform for the most part. And I saw this opportunity because the business program was quite busy with, lots of homework being packed on. And in my first year of university, it was quite different than what I knew in high school. In high school, I had sports to, fall back on in times of stress or, in times of relief. And because I was in university and I was older, I didn't have that anymore because I was too old to play hockey. And, more importantly, I didn't have the time to play competitive hockey like I used to in high school and even in elementary school. And I was done playing soccer. So I thought this would be a good tool to use to relieve my stress and to relieve me of my stress. So when I applied for the site, I applied originally actually as a contributor, but because no one was managing the site, they asked me if I wanted to be the managing editor. So I thought, why not? it was never something I did. I had no experience going into it, but it was an opportunity that I saw that presented itself, so I took it. And little did I know that it would open up a lot of avenues for me, and it has allowed me to meet a lot of important people in the industry, specifically in the hockey world, even more specifically within the Florida Panthers organization. And it actually led me to receive an invite from one of the owners, one of Florida's owners, Doug Sifu. I'm not sure if you know the name. And he invited me actually to a practice in Buffalo where the team was practicing ahead of their game with the Buffalo Sabres. And after chatting with their head of PR, he told me that I had a bright future in this. So I thought down the line from there that maybe sports media would be more aligned with my career aspirations than the business program at Ryerson would.
That's really interesting. So I guess you fell in love with sport media because of the Florida Panthers thing, but what was sort of switching from business to sport media like for you? Not many people here I guess nobody we've interviewed apart from Jack had switched programs, and he switched from a different university. So what was sort of switching from one Ryerson program to another like for you?
Well, first it was quite easy because, you can transfer all your credits quite easily and internally where you don't have to really fill out paperwork. So obviously that helped. But I mean, the program that I'm currently in now that we're all in sports media is quite different than business, whereas it's not based or focused on math or, mathematical learning, but rather, theory and a little bit of hands-on and lecture-based style where in business, you didn't really receive any of that balance. So when I made the switch over to sports media, I knew it would be a smooth adjustment for me, and I knew it was going to be the right fit just based on the program background and the outlook that they give you on the website. And from my first day onwards, I realized that it was my fit, and I have to say I've adjusted quite well, and there's been really no problems. I've been quite happy.
Talk to us a little bit about the application process, what that was like, going from program to program. How was it having to write those essays that we had to write for the program to get into? And how was the interview process as well? How did that go?
It was great, I have to say. First off, writing the essays was no trouble for me at all. I didn't have a problem doing that, nor did I struggle really at completing that from what I remember briefly. In terms of applying, filling out, some paperwork and getting your resume updated and all of that, it took a lot of time, but I wouldn't say it was hard by any means. It did mean I had to reach out to some people in terms of gaining some recommendations, and I was quite grateful to receive a recommendation from someone who did work with the Florida Panthers organization. So I'll always be grateful for that, and I do thank him again for giving me a letter of recommendation. But apart from that, really, I think the application stage with the Ryerson Sports Media program was pretty smooth, and it was pretty straightforward, and it wasn't really anything I struggle with. It was more a little bit, anxious in terms of hearing back and whether or not I got into the program. But based on, my experience and some stuff I've done before even applying for the program, I think I was a pretty good candidate going into it, and I was pretty confident that I had a good chance of, being admitted within the program.
Nice.
That's really interesting. Let's sort of dive into, did you have to interview when you were switching from programs, or was it just paperwork based?
In terms of the sports media, when I was applying, I did have to go for the interview. I was actually interviewed by Dan Berlin.
Okay, cool.
Okay. What was that like for you?
Dan Berlin was awesome. He's someone like me who does writing on the side as well. And, him and I are both Cincinnati Bengals fans, as hard as that can be. So, we bonded a little bit over that. But Dan's not only a nice guy, but he's very understanding, and he's the type of guy where you can win him over if you wow him, if you impress him, and if you know what you're doing going into what you're doing, and if you're prepared. Everything he talked about in that journalism class, I think really describes what type of person Dan Berlin is. So as the person who interviewed me, I was, I had the opportunity to actually know Dan Berlin before then, because he actually invited me to one of his classes. Um,
Okay.
just because I knew one of the speakers that was speaking at his class. So I was really grateful for that. But Dan Berlin was awesome. From what I remember briefly, it went by pretty quickly, but all the questions were pretty straightforward. And I have to say, after the first minute, it actually became a conversation rather than him asking me questions off a sheet. So I was really grateful for that. And it's something I'll never forget.
Yeah, it's something we've heard a lot from everybody we've interviewed, where their interview sort of turned into a conversation, which I think is a good thing. You want to have a good relationship with the person who's interviewing you, and yeah. Application, obviously, you had to do the essays. What was the in-person answering questions like? What questions did you have, and sort of what were your answers to them, if you can remember it?
Of course. I actually, if I can admit, seeing I'm in the program, and they can't say anything about it, but I don't want to say I was too smart, but I actually found the questions leaked online. So the night before, you know, I was just reading through them and writing out little answers, right? And doing a little interview actually with my father, right? I just, carelessly looked up on Google, like Ryerson Sports Media interview questions, and lo and behold, I found them, right? So that meant I was a step ahead, right? I had an added advantage, which I thought was great, right? That way I knew what to expect going into it. But the questions more specifically that I received were along the lines of, why do you want to be in sports media? Tell me about your experience related to the field. What makes you a more qualified candidate for the program than somebody else? It was, questions along those lines that I was receiving that I remember briefly. But like I previously mentioned, it after the first minute, it quickly became a conversation. So he basically just dropped the sheet of paper and we just started chatting. So it was just great. Yeah.
Yeah, that's when you know it's going well. I think that's what a lot of people who we've had on have said. It's the interviews, the interview process. They knew it was going well once they just started to have like a normal conversation with the other person. So yeah, that's really cool how you have that relationship with Dan, and how he kind of helped you, get into the program or secure your spot in the program in some way. Um, so what have you enjoyed about the program so far? Obviously, coming in, you probably had some pretty high expectations about the program, considering you made the switch from another program before. So what have you enjoyed about the program so far?
It's a tough one to answer because there's a lot, but I have to say what I mostly enjoy from the program is the balance between theory and hands-on learning, as there's a bit of both, which accommodates to, both sides, because I know all the students in our year specifically, we're all different learners, and that's great in our own way. But what I really liked about it is that it also gives you the practical experience going into the industry in terms of working in front of a camera, working behind a camera, learning how shows work, volunteering at Rams games, doing Rams Live, even doing your own podcast for Spirit Live. I think it's all great. And the amount of versatility with options in terms of building like a little portfolio or beefing up your resume, I think it benefits us students for after our fourth year going into the real world. That way, we're better prepared than other students coming from other like-minded programs when we're all applying for the same jobs. The other thing I'll mention is I've been really grateful for all the professors and part-time contractors that are in the program, that are working and that are there teaching us and taking the time to ensure that we all have the learning tools available to succeed and to gain the specific knowledge that's going to benefit us not only in the short term but also in the long term. And I have to say the professors aren't only understanding and caring, but they're very thorough in their understanding and knowledge of the industry, which I think is equally important. And the fact that they care for us and they're pushing us those extra few steps forward, even in uncomfortable positions, I think it's great because it's only going to benefit us. And it shows that they care about the students rather than just going in there just to get paid, which I know is important because they're doing it for their livelihood. But at the same time, they care for us and they want us to succeed. And they also want us to do roles and jobs that they once did and that they're currently in now, that they are currently are in now, right? And they know that we are the future and they basically want to groom us. So I think it's really good. And yeah, I think from all around, from professors to learning equipment to opportunities and versatility of options, I think it's probably the strongest sports media program within Ontario from what I've seen and researched.
So, has
Oh
there been
yeah.
any sort of courses that have stood out to you?
So far, seeing we've only done 2 years, I it's kind of tough. I would say the journalism program with Dan Berlin was a pretty solid course. I thought he gave us a pretty good understanding of what it's like to be a journalism, the ins and the outs, what you do, what you don't do, what you can expect. The extra experience to not only write articles and to write columns and pieces, but also to interview and, to be a reporter type of thing. I think the journalism program has been pretty good. Vividly off the top of my head, if I can give you another one, um, I think the one with Jeff, I was in your class, Connor. I thought that was a good one. I don't remember the course code, but I think you know which one I'm talking about, right?
Second year TV lab.
Yes, it was in the fall semester. It was in the fall semester. I thought that was a really good class. I know it was long. It was 6 hours, if I'm correct. It was a 6 hour class, if I'm not
9 to 3,
mistaken.
yeah. 9 to 3.
Yeah, and I thought it was great because again, there's probably going to be a lot of students that end up on those type of TV sets, and which is a good thing, right? Because there's a lot of jobs within that type of niche and that industry. So I thought gaining more experience, behind a camera, in front of a camera, as a director, as a floor director, as a switcher operator, I thought that was all good. I think that's great practical experience to build your toolkit and to even beef up your resume. So I would say that was another course I really enjoyed.
Yeah. That TV lab, that was pretty long. But yeah, I think I would say that's probably the class that we've gained the most from, just because there was so much paperwork that we had to do, and like we each had a different role every week, so we got to like rotate and learn, director, graphics, being on air as a host. So I think that was really beneficial. Um where do you see yourself working in the future? Do you think you want to stick with writing? Do you want to work specifically with the Panthers? Because I know you're a big Florida Panthers fan, and you've obviously had that experience with them. So is that kind of like your dream, or do you want to go in another direction?
It's funny you ask. Of course, thinking back on it about a couple of years ago, especially before I was accepted into the program. Just hearing maybe you could work for the Florida Panthers one day, even in my early childhood, would have always been a dream come true, and still remains a dream come true. Whether or not it happens, I don't know. I'll always leave that door open if it's there, so I'll never write it off. But in terms of where I see myself, I don't, to be very honest with you, I don't see myself with writing. It's something I'm pretty good at, and I do have a lot of experience with writing, and I do enjoy it. But it's not the type of niche that I want to get into within this market, in this industry. I would say more so the PR and communications is something I've been gravitated towards, and something I'm trying to push that door open and try and get into. And that's something I'm working towards. So I would say PR and communications within a hockey setting, but any sport really I'm open to. I'm pretty versatile with a number of sports, whether it be hockey, soccer, basketball, or even baseball.
So have you done any work other than the Panthers writing professionally in sport media or that sort of area of the industry?
I have actually. I was lucky enough to be brought on board. I do work actually part-time now at MLSE at Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. And it's probably something I do see myself being a part of, not only for the short term, but also for the long term, as it's a really good company. And it's been, they've been nothing but grateful for me, and it's been a very fruitful job. MLSE has definitely been a big step for me within my sports media career during being in the sports media program. So I do see myself probably trying to climb the ladder within the MLSE company.
And what has that sort of experience been like? You obviously mentioned you're grateful, but like, what do you sort of do in MLSE, and what have you sort of found has you've learned, you've been taught, you've sort of, I guess, taken away from the experience?
Well, when I was first brought on, I was actually first brought on as a freelancer, as a shot lister, which means that I was shot listing Maple Leaf games. I was responsible for shot listing Leaf games, which entailed, clipping clips from, live action from the Leafs games, and, organizing them and labeling them. So that was basically my job when I first started. Just past the new year, just after the new year hit, just before, COVID arrived, I was pretty lucky to have received a part-time offer with MLSE, which meant that I went from freelance over to permanent part-time, part-time. And now my job is more extensive, which means now I work more on the content side. So I haven't really started with my new promotion within part-time, just because of the COVID hit and the pandemic and now being home. So everything unfortunately got put to the side. But to give you a brief scope of what I do now, I'm basically responsible for publishing content to all the properties' websites, whether it be the Leafs, the Raptors, TFC, or the Argos. It also means I'm responsible for real-time updates, for push notifications. So basically just managing all content within with MLSE's properties, and also going to Toronto Marlies games and tracking stats with them, and working with their play-by-play and broadcasters. So that's been another cool role that I've been grateful to be offered.
Jeez, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
really
it's very good. I was really excited to start, and luckily I did have technically a week, and then unfortunately everything kind of just stopped because of the pandemic. But I'm really excited to get the ball rolling once again, and to start gaining more experience in my new role.
Now, will you be the social media person that is stuck in the bubble with the NHL?
I wouldn't mind personally. I mean, I have experience with social media, whether it be the site that I run, or, content that I work with at MLSE, which is, official company property. So I could definitely see myself within social media, if it's not with PR and communications, or even if it's related to PR and communications within that sort of niche. I could totally see myself doing that if I was offered, or if there was a job available. Yeah.
Nice.
That was supposed to be a bit of a joke, but it turned into an actual serious answer and possibility.
Yeah.
I think we would take that too, though, Connor.
You're not wrong.
Yeah.
I will say, though, is I think the one thing we should all remember is you shouldn't limit yourself in this industry, right? Because it can be limiting at times. I think we all know, and jobs are hard to find and come by, especially now with the pandemic taking place. So I think being versatile, which is what a lot of our professors stress, is important. And I think for any of us, whether it be myself, you, Aiden, or even you, Connor, I think anybody should, grab that opportunity and take it by the horns and run, right? I think it's a great opportunity, not something that someone should just fluff off.
Yeah. Let's sort of wrap up your little personal bit because we're running out of time on the Zoom call.
Sure.
What would you say would be the 3 biggest things you've learned? We'll do first in the program, and then second we'll do in your actual professional experience at MLSC and with the Panthers fan-sided stuff.
Sure. So I'll start with our program. I think what I've learned most from the program is basically what I just mentioned, which is versatility. I know I may sound a little bit like a broken record, but I do think it's something that should be stressed, and I do think it's important not only for myself but for the rest of my colleagues who will end up, obtaining a job of some sort within this industry. So I think versatility is key, and open-mindedness. Never dismissing a particular role or going in there with a bad mindset. I think going in there with an open mind, whether or not you know much about a role or you like it, I think is important, because you never know. Maybe that'll be what you do 10 years from now or even for the next 30 years. So I think versatility and open-mindedness are probably the 2 virtues, if I can call them that, that I've learned from this program. Second, with my job at MLSC, I think what I've learned most is, just maintaining and continuing to build bridges and to not only retain connections, but to, obtain more connections. It's great that you retain people who you know, but branching off and meeting other people and being open-minded and listening to them and taking their advice and applying it is just as equally key, because you never know when you'll need a helping hand, whether it's, trying to land a job or even if it's a letter of recommendation. You just never know when someone can help you. So I think that's definitely been something that I've learned from the short time that I've been at MLSC since starting in the fall. And finally, with my Florida work, I think the biggest thing I've learned is not only hard work, which I think is something I've always gravitated towards and really stressed upon myself, but I think integrity and honesty. Just, being a journalist, I think having integrity and honesty is key in that sort of niche. And I have learned from times, even when I've made mistakes, not necessarily with relating to integrity or honesty, but other mistakes that other journalists have made. You learn from that, and it's something that I've really learned, that integrity and honesty are key in terms of going far if you're in that niche, and just being a respectable person that people will want to not only associate with but will want to work with. I think that's key, and I think that's something I'll take away with from my Florida stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because it's a lot of what we've tried to take out of this program. We've had professors force professionally, or not force, but push professionality, I guess, on us, whether it be with Dan Berlin during his journalism course and going and interviewing coaches or players, whether it be that versatility in the TV lab. We really learn that in this program. And I think that's really key. And it's interesting that you point that out, that it's not just in this program, it's the entire industry. And hopefully we all get jobs. We all cross our fingers that we will, but again, there's never a guarantee. And I think that's sort of what you have to keep in mind when you're getting into this industry. It's tough. It's something that's continually shrinking, unfortunately, but hopefully you're good enough to avoid that shrink. And it sounds like you are, considering you're already working for MLSE.
Thank you.
But yeah, we're going to take a quick break. For you, it'll be half a second. For us, it'll be probably 5 minutes.
Let's hope it's half a second.
Yeah, we'll be right back. Go ahead, sorry.
No, go. We'll be back in half a second.
we'll be back in half a second. Talk actual sports news. So, bye. Hi again. We're back after that half-second break. I'm obviously on a different mic because I was trying something out and it didn't really work. So hopefully this is a bit better. And I don't have to crank the gain as much on my little mixer thing I got. So yeah, it's another mistake that we've made over the past 2 episodes, which I think we do need to address. Obviously, in our last edit, if you actually watched it, I don't know how far through it was or when it was, but we may have missed something to cut out. And by we, I mean our editor. I'm not going to name which one of us it was, but it wasn't me. So yeah, heads up. You'll see. I guess you saw what sort of goes into us recalling and doing these podcasts behind the scenes for a little bit. But hope you enjoyed that. Hopefully, it doesn't happen again because at least it was a little clean and we
Yeah.
didn't drop just any foul language on it.
Yeah, it was good. It was fine in terms of that. Like watching it back, I was just like, first I was obviously in shock that I still kept that part in. I was like, how didn't I cut that out? Because when I go through it in Premiere, I normally always cut the ins and outs for every single Zoom call that we do. But for some reason, I only cut the ins and I didn't cut the outs. So after Connor would say, like, we'll be back in 1 second, we just continued the conversation for like another 30 seconds. And then we jumped into the next call. So it was a little bit unprofessional. But yeah, luckily there was nothing bad said. And people know that we're on a Zoom call. So I guess it's fine. But it will not happen again. Or I don't know what's going to happen. But
I did not realize that was every single out.
Okay. I think it was 2 of the outs. It was 2 of the outs.
That's not that bad.
And I cut the out on the last Zoom call too. So it ended smoothly at least.
It's fine. At least you're not me. If you don't know, I edit Staff and Graph, the Staff and Graph podcast. I audio produce for them. And one time I uploaded the wrong audio. So that was
that's pretty bad. I've never done that.
To wake up to, or a message to wake up to. It was only the week before's audio. Like I selected the audio for that week, but that wasn't exactly ideal. Whatever, we're not going to drag this on. We figured we'd just acknowledge it and then jump into all of the sports news because there was a lot of it this week. Let's start with what we forgot to start with last week and what I forgot to mention last week and add to our doc. Vince Carter retired. Official, probably, maybe, we hope. I don't know how I forgot to put this in the doc or we forgot to mention it last week. But yeah, legend in the basketball world. I'd assume the oldest basketball player still playing. He was the only player to have played in, I think, 3 decades, which is 2020, 2010s, 2000s. Maybe 4. It was 4 decades because he also played in the 90s.
He did play in the 90s, yeah.
So he's the only player to have ever played 4 decades, which was pretty cool. And he finally retired, which was rumored to happen. It's unfortunate that he didn't get the fanfare that he deserved on his final season. But I think everybody's acknowledging him. He's gotten a lot of attention on social media, so hopefully that's good enough. But figured we'd acknowledge that because it was another error we made last week. Last week was not a good podcast for us. Like, it was a good podcast in terms of the conversation with Andrew.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. He was great. Our end was not very good. We'll be better this week, hopefully. Cross your fingers. But yeah, let's dive into, we're talking about NBA, so let's hit NBA really quickly. The Milwaukee Bucks have shut down their training camp / facilities due to coronavirus results. The Sacramento Kings have also done the exact same. They only had 1 case in their traveling party, but they're playing it safe because I think they might travel today. So there wasn't really a point in opening it up I believe they closed it over the weekend or Monday. So there wasn't really a point in just resuming it for a couple days when they could just have everybody stay home and play it safe, which is smart. The same thing with Milwaukee. We're not quite sure how many positives they had, but I guess that happens. A full list of the teams that tested positive, I'll give you in a second once the tweet opens, but my Wi-Fi has been sketchy at best today, so there we go. So the 7 teams that have closed are obviously the Kings and the Bucks. The Heat, which, not surprising, the Clippers, the Nuggets, the Suns, and the Nets. And the Nets is where we're going next because they have had nothing short of an outbreak. Every single good team good team. Every single good player on their team, apart from Karis Levert, has basically tested positive for COVID and will not be going. DeAndre Jordan won't be going. Obviously, Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant won't be going or playing because injuries. And Spencer Dinwiddie isn't going. I already said Spencer Dinwiddie, didn't I?
I
I
don't
didn't
think you
mention
did.
DeAndre. Okay,
You said Jordan. You said Jordan.
okay.
It's good.
Last couple days have been a very busy one for me. But yeah, those are the 4 guys who have sort of tested positive who will not be going. So good luck to the Nets. They're gonna need it. It'll be a battle between them and the Wizards into who falls out of the playoffs first. Because the Wizards don't have, as we mentioned a couple weeks ago, Davis Bertans or Bradley Beal going. So they have nobody left either. Yeah, it's not good. Oh, I should also mention.
It's not looking good for the NBA. Like with so many players dropping out, and it just the competition gets so much weaker. So I think there's just going to be even more players dropping out in the coming days as well, leading up to it. Daniel, do you have any thoughts on all these players dropping out? Do you kind of see where they're coming from?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna even suggest, maybe all of this could could be shut down entirely, right? If all these players are testing positive and, all these teams are, losing their star players or, even their good bench players due to COVID or injuries or whatever the case may be. I mean, how are they going to be able to, field a roster, so to speak, or bring enough players to play, or to keep it competitive, or even just to have enough stars to keep consumers and fans engaged and watching the game. So I really don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's really interesting to watch as things develop. You've seen it in the MLS, which we'll get into in a little bit because Daniel is a soccer guy, as he mentioned earlier. One player I didn't mention, which I don't know how I didn't mention, was Taurean Prince, who also plays for the Brooklyn Nets. So they're looking real thin right now. Honestly, if they're able to, I would not be surprised to see them potentially pull out. It's not unprecedented in sports. We've had FC Dallas pull out, even though they didn't pull out. They got forced out by the MLS. You look at the NWSL, where the Orlando Pride had 6 positive players and 4 positive staff. And they had to pull out of the NWSL's tournament, which is going on right now. It's not unprecedented, and I could see it potentially happening in the NBA with either the Wizards or, well, maybe not the Wizards because they haven't had any positives, but I could definitely see it with the Brooklyn Nets, which would, I guess, automatically put Washington into the playoffs. I'm not really sure how they would decide that because I think Washington's on the outside looking in, if I'm correct. So what does that mean for the playoffs? It's something you're going to have to watch. It's something that we're all going to have to watch. Somebody who's not decided to actually go, though, is someone who opted out a little while ago in Dwight Howard. He announced that he will be going and donating all the salary that he earns to his own charity to fight for equality issues and the Black Lives Matter movement and everything like that. And today, I'm blanking on the name of the player, but he plays for the Spurs. He's donating all of the rest of his salary he's from Australia, so to charities in Australia fighting for equality there. So we're seeing a good movement of players donating money that they would have earned to create positive change, which I think is very notable in the NBA. One of the things that they're also doing is they're allowing players to customize the names on the back of their jerseys, whether it be with the terms equality, it'd be education reform is, I believe, another one. There are like a dozen or so names that players can put on the back of their jerseys instead. So we've already seen some names come out. I don't have them in front of me, so I'm not going to say who's picked or what they've picked, but it's a good movement. Daniel, what do you guys sort of think about the NBA still going ahead with this? With cases in Florida exploding, I believe there were another 10,000 new cases in Florida today. We've had five digits cases day over day, like 5 times in the last 6 days. Where do you guys think the NBA should go with this tournament? And do you think that allowing them players to change the jerseys is enough for them to do during this uh, tournament playoffs, regular season combo thing? Or do you think that they need to do more apart from painting the court, the BLM? I think it's Black Lives Matter, or just BLM. I can't remember exactly. Do you guys think they're doing enough, or do you think that they should do more?
I think having players customize the names on their jerseys is really big, because whenever you're going to watch an NBA game, you're going to see that, and it's going to draw in a lot of eyes to what the players are trying to do with this whole Black Lives Matter movement. So yeah, like I said, like every single time you see them play, you're going to see those names that they have on the jersey. So it just gives a lot more recognition to what they're trying to do. Do I think that they could be doing more? Yes. Um, I I still think that, something that would be huge is just canceling the entire season if you really want to try and take a stand against Black Lives Matter. But that's obviously not going to happen unless the coronavirus decides that it's going to end the season for them. But going back to the first part of your question, um, I I like all the procedures that the NBA has put in place. Um, I think just the one big question mark that everyone has is where they're playing, Florida. Like Connor said, the cases are skyrocketing every single day there. I think the NBA is confident in the bubble that they have, and I'm confident in the bubble, but it's just Florida, right? It's Florida. It's the worst place to be right now. So I am definitely in question about that. But in terms of their procedures, I like them.
To your first question, Connor, I'm honestly not sure what's going to happen, right? Because as you noted before and you previously mentioned, a lot of players are testing positive, and now a lot of players are, going to have to self quarantine, the minimum 14 days. So I guess we're going to have to see. It's going to be interesting, but I'm not sure, personally speaking, whether or not the season should go on. I think if it continues to go at this rate, I do think maybe the NBA should step in and, decide whether or not this is worth the risks of, the players' health and, just the well-being of everyone who's involved in, these games going on in Orlando for the summer. So again, I'm not really sure whether or not it's going to go through. I think if it continues, I think they probably should cancel it altogether. But again, I don't think I'm really in a position myself personally to make that decision, obviously. And I do hope that the games do continue to proceed, as it's more entertainment for fans and fans like us. So obviously, I do hope that it goes through. But whether or not it does is an entirely different scenario and question. To your second question, in terms of allowing players to customize their jersey, I think it's cool and I think it's a neat idea for every player to be able to spread their own message, because I think everyone has a different story. I think every human being does. So I think just allowing players to personalize even just a little message on the back of their jersey, or whether it says Black Lives Matter or education reformed, as you mentioned, I think it's a pretty good idea for each player to be able to share his message. Now, whether or not it's enough, I mean, I don't personally think so. I think more probably has to be done in that regard, but I do think it's a step in the right direction, and I think it's a cool and neat little idea.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see what the NBA is doing. You haven't really seen any other leagues apart from maybe the Premier League who customized the back of players' shirts the first week that they came back with Black Lives Matter. But it'll be interesting to see if any other leagues do it, whether it be the MLB, the NHL, or MLS, which I think we should dive into. I think we should dive into soccer a little bit because some interesting stuff has happened over the last few days. We'll dive into, I guess, initially the MLS, because we're talking about COVID and that is a problem potentially there. If you have not been following MLS or anything that's been happening in MLS, basically the FC Dallas, who are soccer team in MLS, they're okay, they're decent, probably on the bubble of making playoffs, etc. They had 10 players test positive, as well as 2 staff members, and MLS basically kicked them out of the tournament. They're not the only team who's had multiple cases. There are other teams who have singular cases, but one team that has had multiple cases is Nashville. Nashville is right now, I think it's 5 confirmed cases with the potential for 3 or 4 more. They're not sure if they're positives or false positives, because that's the thing. If you're not aware how testing works, it's not 100%. They sometimes get it wrong, and you sort of have to base it off of 2 or 3 tests, which we'll dive into a bit with the NHL. But right now, the MLS is in a bit of a tough spot. They kick off in 45 minutes with Orlando against Miami. So we'll see what happens there. There's one Twitter account, which I'm not going to name, who has been a bit of an insider. But this account has been incredibly negative towards resuming play. And people, I, along with some other people at the website I write for, are starting to think it might be a player who is in the bubble, because they're getting a lot of information from inside the bubble that insiders are getting after them. We're not 100% sure, of course, but it's sort of leaning that way. And it's interesting to see, because this is definitely a person who doesn't want play to resume very, very clearly. And it's been very evident with everything that they've been tweeting. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with Nashville and what happens with MLS, because they really are the testing ground for the NBA when you really think about it. They're the team in Orlando who's basically sharing the bubble with basketball. And if there is an outbreak among the players, that could be a massive issue for not only MLS, but potentially the NBA. Probably not, but you never know. Let's stop talking about depressing and sad and frustrating MLS news that nobody cares about except for me, and dive into some actually positive stuff around Gianluigi Buffon. He set the record for PSG matches, or I guess in Serie A, period, with his 648th game. So, Daniel, you are a Juventus fan. What does that mean to you?
Well, I mean, I'll set the record straight. I'm technically not a Juventus fan. I support Ronaldo and follow them, but I guess you could say I am a supporter right now, just to kind of give you the context behind that. But to kind of answer or to elaborate on what you just mentioned about Gianluigi Buffon, Gigi Buffon, I think it's something that was coming. He's, apart from the short stint that he played in France, as you mentioned, with PSG, he's pretty much been a Serie A lifer, particularly with Juventus, starting out with a smaller side like Parma during his very early days in his career. So I think it was just only a matter of time before he set this record. And when he re-signed with Juventus after ending his short stint with PSG in Liga 1, it's actually part of his contract that he would play certain games, whether it be league games or tournament games like the Coppa Italia, or even Champions League. Not that he's played any this year, but it's in his contract that he is supposed to play a specific amount of games so that he could reach this record. That's something that's been kind of on, I guess you could say, the back burner, or been on the table just waiting to accomplish. And like I said, it's only been a matter of time, really. And we all knew it was going to occur this year. When it was gonna occur this year, nobody really knew, especially with the whole COVID and the league getting set back because of that. So, but yeah, it's great for Gigi Buffon, and it's also great at the same time for Serie A.
Yeah, it's really good to see as somebody who a lot of people like finally accomplish a record that is very, very impressive, frankly. We'll stick with Italians and hit Daniele De Rossi, who is reportedly about to become Fiorentina's new manager. He, I believe, has potential. He doesn't have any experience managing, I don't believe. He's currently playing in Argentina. I'm not sure if he's retired yet officially, but last time, the last I've heard, he was in Argentina playing. So it's really interesting to see him get a Serie A job right away, straight into Fiorentina's open spot. We'll see what happens. He's slated for next season. We'll see. I don't really know what's going to happen with that. I think it's just a rumor at this point, but it is something to watch. Let's finally, before we hit soccer, because there wasn't a ton of soccer news, to be honest. Ronaldo scored a free kick, which was a banger. So I guess that's the first one he scored in, I think, like 40 or 50 attempts. So I guess good to get the monkey off his back for that. But final thing we're going to mention is, as I mentioned last week, was Leroy Sané has officially joined Bayern Munich. That's going to be a disgusting left wing with him and Alphonso Davies. I'm in a similar boat as Daniel, where I am an Alphonso Davies fan first, so now I'm justly a Bayern Munich fan, and that's fun. One thing I forgot to add to the document, actually, was Jonathan David. Aiden, you don't know who that is.
Another
Jonathan,
Canadian.
yeah, he's
Yep.
the other Canadian. He's an attacker, striker, cam-ish. He has basically agreed to personal terms, which means he's signed a contract saying that he will get paid this much if a transfer happens with Lille in Ligue 1. So that'll be a really interesting move if it happens. He will hopefully get starting minutes, and it'll be a better league than the Belgian league, which is where he is currently at. But I figured I'd just throw that in. We might have some breaking soccer news now. I actually just have to check this. What is
If I
happening?
could quickly add on to that, Connor, I think it's a great move for David all around because Lille, they're a pretty big team within Liga.
Yeah.
They have made Champions League recently, so that'll be a good stepping stone for him, as he didn't have that platform to play on when he was playing in the Belgian league. And Lille are notorious for developing youngsters and selling them on for a higher price to a bigger club. So they're going to give him a platform where he's going to get fair playing time, probably a lot of playing time given his skill. And he's going to be monitored by a coach who's going to put him in the best, possible situation in order for him to succeed. So I think all around this is a great move for him. And it's just basically a stepping stone move to kind of progress his career. So as a Canadian as well as you, I'm really happy with the move, especially when I saw and heard about it.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see him progress good because, especially in the Ligue 1, because one of the leagues that he apparently wanted to go to the most was the Bundesliga. We'll see whether or not this move actually happens because obviously the clubs haven't agreed to terms yet, but it's getting close. The breaking news that I was just checking was there were some people reporting that the Orlando-Miami match might have gotten canceled.
Wow.
But it appears it was just a Google glitch where it was showing up canceled, but it wasn't actually canceled. So I'll keep an eye on that throughout the show. I believe the potential lineup for Inter Miami have been released. They have, based on their preview show, but we haven't seen it confirmed yet. It'll be something we have to watch out for and something I will follow. So if something does happen, and I sure hope it doesn't because I just want MLS back so badly, I'll let you know. But yeah, let's jump away from soccer and let's hit baseball before we get into the NHL. And actually, let's hit NFL. And then we'll do baseball and NHL after our Zoom call ends because we only have 10 minutes left. NFL. There was some interesting developments, both positive and negative, around the league. Specifically, we should start with the positive because the negative will help us sort of get into the MLB issues. positive. Patrick Mahomes signed a contract extension with the Cincinnati Chiefs for
Kansas
Cincinnati,
City. Kansas City.
City. Oh man,
Yeah.
Kansas City Chiefs. It's a
Daniel wishes Mahomes was on Cincinnati.
We got Joe Burrow, baby.
True, you're right about
That's
that.
true.
Yeah, yeah.
I was gonna make fun of you for Andy Dalton for a second, but then I realized he left and went to Dallas for some reason. Um, Patrick Mahomes signed a contract extension with the Kansas City Chiefs for 10 years. He has 2 years remaining on his contract, so this will be ultimately a 12-year contract. The last time a decade-long contract was signed, I believe, was back in the early 2000s. So it's been like 15 years-ish since the last massive contract like this has been signed. It's going to be worth over $400 million. It's going to be, I think, guaranteed. It's around 450, and it could potentially get up to 503 million with add-ons or incentives. But it's fairly unlikely that he's going to reach every one of those incentives. So it'll be somewhere between 450 and 500,000, 500 million. Kansas City wishes it was 1,000. It makes up for about 20% of the Chiefs' cap. So good luck to them in the future. That's a whole lot of your cap tied up in one player, especially if he gets injured, which if he does get injured is 140 million guaranteed. So he could get injured and have a career-ending injury tomorrow, and he would never have to play football again and would still make 140 million. What do you guys think of this deal? Daniel, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm not too surprised by the deal just based on Patrick Mahomes' age and his skill set, his versatility and his toolkit and his tool bag. I think we all know what Mahomes is about. I think Aiden, probably agrees with this. He's probably, I would say he's the best quarterback in the game right now. I thought he showed it last year when he led the Kansas City Chiefs to the Super Bowl. Now, of course, they have a good team. I don't think I can leave that out. But obviously, Patrick Mahomes is a driving force. He's an elite quarterback, and I think he's a special individual and athlete altogether. And when you put those qualities together, you got a game changer. And when the ball's in his hands, he knows how to push the ball down the field, and he knows how to, get his team touchdowns in critical moments of the game. So I think the contract is warranted. I think it's deserved. I'm not particularly surprised. Like you mentioned, Connor, it's 20% of Casey's, cap, which could be risky. But again, with a player like Mahomes, you got to be willing to take that risk, or else he's going to take his talents elsewhere.
Yeah, I agree with Daniel. I think, when Connor sent me the report that he got the new contract for 10 years, I think, I wasn't as surprised as I thought I would be, just because I know the caliber of player that Patrick Mahomes is. And, already winning a Super Bowl at his age is great in itself. But I think Mahomes is probably the most complete quarterback in the NFL right now, because, he obviously has a cannon of an arm. He can throw the ball way downfield. And yeah, those wide receivers that Kansas City has helps a lot with that, but he still has to be able to throw the ball to them. And then as well, he can run the ball as well. He's very versatile in the pocket. He can move around very easily. And he gets creative with stuff as well. You see that left-handed throw that he did a couple times last year. He's very good at throwing across his body as well. So he has the entire toolkit. And yeah, I think he's the best quarterback in the league right now, like Daniel said. And he's, a great option for Kansas City. That's something they want to build around for a long time. They want to have him a part of their team. So I think it's a great, I know the money is ridiculous, but I think it's still a great move for Kansas City, because they had to get him locked up. They don't want to lose this guy whatsoever. I think it's worth the risk of an injury because he's that good. Simply, he's that good. I was telling Connor before the show started that I think Mahomes might even win as many Super Bowls as Brady did. I know that's a big hot take to say because Brady is the GOAT, but I think Mahomes' potential is through the roof, and I think he's really good. So
You
I
had a
think I
hot
think it's worth it.
you had a hot take lined up and you've already wasted it. I am disappointed in you.
To put it short, Patrick Mahomes is basically going to be the Tom Brady for Kansas City. I think we can all agree on that for now, based on the way he's playing and his career trajectory.
Yeah, it is the richest deal in sports history, which I think we probably should note because that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah,
Um, maybe
just
a
a little
little
bit.
bit,
Yeah.
just a little bit. Do you guys think this is risky at all? Because obviously he had the injury this season where he dislocated his kneecap. Do you think that this could come back to bite Kansas City in the future, especially down the road when he might be a bit more beat up? Or do you think this is a safe bet given how good he is?
I mean, like it's 12 years, so I mean anything can happen. Like I think with any player, there's always the risk of an injury, right? So you just have to look at it like that. I think the past injury that Mahomes just had, it wasn't like anything too serious. He was able to miss a few weeks and come back and return to MVP caliber form and win a Super Bowl. That is a big thing that he did. So, I think teams are willing to look past the injury concerns and really just give him the money. Do I think it's risky? It could be. Like by the time his contract is up, though, I still think that he could have a couple more good years left in him. I don't think, it's not like a 20-year deal where you're like going to bring on like a 40-year-old. He's going to be like mid 30s when this contract is up. And if you look at some of the older quarterbacks in the league, like Brady, for example, or even a guy like Manning or even like
Aaron Rodgers.
exactly Aaron Rodgers, guys like that, they're still performing late until their 30s. So the term I don't really have any problem with. And with the injuries, like injuries happen all the time. It could happen, but I think it's going to be worth it in the end.
What about
Yeah,
you,
I
Daniel?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with what Aiden's saying. I think we also have to recognize that, none of us and nobody has a crystal ball where we can predict something like this could occur. Obviously, when you sign a contract like this, those are thoughts that do arrive in your head, but it is still worth the risk considering the player that, we're speaking about that is, putting pen to paper. The other thing I'll mention, though, is if Kansas City can continue to beef up and retain their O-line to protect Patrick Mahomes, I think that's important, right? Because, there's been lots of great quarterbacks over the years, but that have unfortunately suffered from a lot of serious injuries because they weren't quite protected, right? They weren't protected in the pocket or protected at all. And I think that's a big thing if they want to avoid this potential injury concern or scare or accident, whatever you want to call it, with Mahomes pertaining to his 10-year deal over the next 12 years, as you mentioned, Connor, considering he has 2 years left on his current deal. But other than that, I think based on the way he's playing, which I think is more important when you sign a deal like this and when you offer a deal like this, I think Mahomes is worth it. And I don't think Kansas City would have offered it if they didn't feel that he was moving the needle this far or he was pushing the ball, this far important down the field in order to translate those plays into W's.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to watch. We're going to touch on racist team names in 1 second. All right, well, let's talk racist team names because there's been a bit of a, how should I say, awakening for team owners and team personnel, I guess. There have been multiple teams saying that they will consider changing their names, whether it be Edmonton's football team or not Chicago. We'll get into Chicago actually because that's a really interesting discussion to have. But we'll do that with the hockey section of this podcast. What I want to start with is Washington. Washington's football team. I'm not going to say the name because it is a literal racial slur, but it's not very good. Washington's majority owner has for a long time been very against changing the name. Why? I feel like you could probably make your own assumptions. I'm not going to make any accusations or say anything like that, but it's probably fair to assume what I'm suggesting. And finally, because of, I believe it was 3 companies, and potentially it might have been 1 company and 3 minority owners in the team, were looking at selling if the team did not change their name. FedEx was also, who is the stadium name rights holder, said to Washington that they must change their name if they want to stay a partner. Now, this is where things start to develop because Washington's owner, I believe his name is Ed Snyder. I know his last name is Snyder, but I can't remember his actual last name.
Daniel Snyder.
Or Daniel Snyder. Okay. So he's basically said at this point that they will change their name. Finally, it's about time. This has been a debate topic, which probably shouldn't have been a debate at all for the last probably decade. And they have 3 names or a few names that they're considering. We're not going to get into the names because we don't know what they are, and we'll probably know them by next week because at this point they got to do it as fast as possible because they've already taken a PR hit since everything has started and people have started to realize the actual problems there are in society. But what do you guys think about Washington changing its name? Do you think that it was the right decision, the right time? Do you think this should have been done a lot sooner? Do you think that they shouldn't have changed it at all? Where do you sort of stand on this? We'll start with you, Aiden.
I mean, yes, 100%. This name definitely should be changed. It is about time. They are late doing it. So I guess that answers the first 2 of your questions. Yeah, I completely agree with what the public has been saying about this. It's been long overdue, and I'm glad that finally the owner is taking this seriously and is actually considering doing it. And it sounds like the Redskins or the Washington Redskins will make this move very soon. And it's kind of unfortunate that they're doing this now because of, I guess, pressure by the fans. I would have hoped that them internally could come to this decision themselves, but ultimately, I guess in the end, I'm just glad that they will be getting a new name. We don't know what that name is yet, but I know that there's probably going to be some negativity coming no matter what for their new name change as well. I don't think everyone's going to be happy about it. There's always going to be 2 sides to the story. But in my opinion, it is the right decision to change the name.
Daniel, what do you think?
Yeah, I've heard both sides of the story, or both sides of the coin, to say in terms of this discussion and this sort of debate. Me personally, I don't mind whether they keep it or not. I mean, I'm not someone who's of Native Aboriginal descent. However, if those people in the masses feel that it should be changed and they vote that they should change it for whatever reasons, as both of you stated, then I'm totally cool with that. And if I can add on to that, personally, as an NFL fan myself, I think their jerseys are ugly anyways. I think it's a horrible color pattern. And I think the logo's kind of ugly. So I'm cool with it personally. I don't have a problem with it. I don't sit really particularly on one side or the other, but if they decide to change it, or if they are, I'm personally fine with it. So I see no issue in this particular case at all.
Yeah, it's just sort of been a situation, I think, where I don't necessarily agree with your opinion because I think that they should have changed it a long time ago. More on that side. But it's the owner's decision, I guess. And whether you agree or disagree with it, you got to live with what he decides because it's his product. If he wants to take the massive PR hit and not changing it, which he has done over the last 10 years, he will. But I think it's really good that they're finally changing it after so long. I think they might keep the same color scheme, so your hopes on that side, Daniel, might be broken. From what I've seen in terms of designs, I think they might base it off of this. Might have, I can't remember if it was them or Cleveland. No, this was them because Cleveland, which we'll dive into, the Cleveland baseball team, which will be our little transition from NFL to baseball. The Washington football team has this sort of plain design, which looked really cool. It was sort of more retro, and I liked it a lot. I think it's sort of been surfacing a little bit on Twitter, so maybe that's what they go with. We'll should know hopefully in the next week or so, but it'll be just good to get rid of that for the NFL. And one thing I want to add before we move on to Cleveland is it's notable how it takes the financial how do I put this? It's interesting how the first time that a company steps up, whether like a massive company like FedEx steps up and says, we're not okay with this, it's time for you to change, and how quickly a team changes. I think if there are maybe more corporate pushing from different companies and advertisers, you might see a bit more change for certain teams a bit quicker. But we're getting rid of those, which I think is very positive because, as I mentioned, Cleveland's getting close to doing the same thing as well. I'm not sure if it's in terms of the name, but it's definitely in terms of the logo. There are rumblings that they will be changing their logo. It wouldn't surprise me to see them change their name. Where do you guys stand on that? Because Cleveland has made changes in the past, whether it be changing their Chief Wahoo logo and using that symbol throughout their, I guess, caps and uniforms and memorabilia. Do you think that they've sort of been making the right steps in terms of a gradual change, or do you think it should be a lot more immediate than it has been?
Honestly, I do like the fact that they got rid of that logo that you talked about. I think it was long overdue, like the Washington logo was as well, or name was. But do I think that they should change their name as well? I think they should really consider it. I think, if there is a time to do it, it would be right now because of what's happening with Washington, what we see and going on in the world right now. There's no better time to make a change if you were to do one. So, I know Cleveland has, a lot of history with that name and logo, but I do think that they should consider making a change. I don't think just changing that logo that they used to have is enough. I think, the players would be behind that, but ultimately it's just going to come down to the owners. And if they want to do that, right now, I don't see as much pressure from the fans towards Cleveland than there is to Washington yet. But I think as soon as Washington announces their new name, all that negativity is going to go towards Cleveland. And ultimately, I think they will change their name. And I think it's going to be sooner than you'd expect.
What about you, Daniel?
Yeah, I pretty much side with where Aiden's kind of lying. The only thing really I'll add on to Aiden's point is if we're going to get rid of the Washington Redskins entirely, then that means I think then we have to get rid of all names like that, whether it be the Chicago Blackhawks, the Cleveland Indians, because you know what I mean? If we get rid of one, then you have to get rid of all the other ones, right? It has to be equality all across the board. We can't keep one and not keep the other, right? So
Yeah.
I'm actually I'm for I'm for getting rid of Cleveland Indians. I'm fine and for getting rid of Washington Redskins. So if we just have to ensure that they're all being dismantled and replaced with something new. And I see really no issue with that.
We'll dive into the Chicago situation because it actually doesn't have racist undertones, apparently, because they issued a statement, which we'll dive into in a little bit. I th- I think it's time that we see these changes. With Washington, I think it should have come a lot sooner because obviously it is a literal slur. It is incredibly not accepted anymore. With Cleveland, it's sort of gradual. Chicago is apparently not rooted in racism, so I'm not actually sure about them. And I think interesting situation around right now is Edmonton. Their football team in the CFL. They've issued statements. Edmonton Eskimos, if you're not know what their actual name is, they've sort of talked to Indigenous communities and First Nations communities about whether or not they're comfortable with Edmonton still using the name. And they released, I believe it was a paper. I might have that incorrect. It might have just been a statement saying that they had talked to these people and that they didn't really get a definitive answer. And now with everything that's happened, they're going to re-examine that decision and re-examine what happened. So you might see a change there. But I think that's sort of what you have to do in these situations is you have to talk to the people who it actually affects. And with Washington, people have wanted it changed for a long time. With Cleveland, it's very similar. Whether or not it happens in Chicago or in Edmonton remains to be seen, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's hit some other baseball news and get out of the whole racism debate, which probably shouldn't be a debate at all because racism is bad, if you didn't know. Jays are back in TL. They finally escaped the hellhole that is Florida right now. Considering, as I mentioned earlier, they had 10,000 cases again today and have had over the last week multiple times. I believe they passed like 200,000 very recently in the state. So that's just known. Yeah, I don't even want to know how many are unknown because thankfully they're back. They did have to leave 12 players in Dunedin because one player or staff member tested positive and they had to, or I can't remember if it was one or a couple, but they had to leave people behind to make sure that they quarantine and make sure that they didn't have the virus. So we'll see when they arrive back in Toronto. But they were doing batting practice today, as Aiden pointed out to me pre-show. Nate Pearson posted that on his story. So do you guys think it's good that they're back here? Do you think that they should have been stuck in Buffalo or Dunedin instead, and you don't really want them here? Potentially bringing the virus to Canada, we've done a pretty decent job of handling it. We haven't been perfect by any means, but we've done all right. So do you think they should stay far away, or are you comfortable with them quarantining at the hotel attached to the Rogers Center?
I mean, in terms of like my safety, you mean? I think like I'm really concerned about the safety of the Toronto Blue Jays, and you know those are my favorite players. I want them to stay safe, and I think being in anywhere in the U.S., whether that be Florida or Buffalo, would be bad for them. So I think being home and being in a safe place. It sounds like it's a safer place. Being in that hotel that's attached to Rogers Center, with a couple floors just for the Jays. I think that's very good, and I feel comfortable with them playing there. I'm really worried for the other MLB teams who are still practicing around the Florida location, and because there's so many reports of them shutting down their training facilities. You normally see one every single day. There's a team, whether that be in the NBA or in the MLB, that has shut down their training facilities for that day. So I'm glad that they're back. I think it was the right decision. I know the players are back. You mentioned Charlie Montoyo. He's probably really happy to be back in Toronto in Canada. Do I think that they're going to be playing games here? That's yet to be decided on. But hopefully they're in a safe place.
Yeah, I completely agree with Aiden. I think it's better that they're quarantined here in Toronto rather than in Florida, just given what we know right now, with the rising spike in numbers in Florida and Toronto, basically on surface level and kind of trending on a good line where, we can all still live, but not in the, extent of fear that they are kind of in Florida with the rise of numbers. So I think it's better that they're here in Toronto rather than in Florida, which most of the Jays players aren't even from. So I think it's better that they're here for their well-being and their safety.
Yeah, Aiden mentioned the Charlie Montoyo thing, and he did do an interview today where he said he felt relieved to be out of Florida, which frankly I don't blame him. It's good that he's back because a lot of people in the States have tested positive, whether it be DJ LeMayo or
LeMahieu.
LeMahieu. Thank you.
Yeah.
I knew I was going to butcher that immediately. Or King Felix, or not King Felix, Joey Gallo. King Felix opted out instead. But yeah, DJ and Joey Gallo both not opted out. Oh man, have both tested positive
Yeah.
for the virus. So I guess
Yeah.
in essence they've opted out for at least 2 weeks. But yeah, it's sort of a worrying trend that there's continuing to be baseball players who are testing positive, and the testing situation in baseball is very bad right now. A bunch of services didn't even show up to training facilities for teams over the weekend. I believe the Angels were one of them. So it's not looking good for baseball, for being very generous in that statement. But maybe they're getting close. They're resuming play in just over 2 weeks. So
Schedule came out yesterday as well.
yeah, we'll see what happens. They released their schedule, which I guess we could dive into with the Jays really quickly. Their opening game is, I believe, against the Tampa Bay Rays, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, so they start July 24th, 6:40 p.m. against Tampa Bay in Tampa Bay. So I'm so sorry, Blue Jays players and staff. You're going to have to
Why
go to
are they
Florida.
traveling? I just don't get it.
I wish they could just sort of opt out for a season.
Yeah, honestly,
and say, we don't really want to play this year. Thanks for the offer, but we'll pass. But unfortunately, that isn't an option, as that would probably cost them millions and millions of dollars, and they're not going to be okay with that. Their first homestand will be Wednesday, July 29th against the Nationals. So they'll be getting Washington in town. All Jays home games are going to start at 6:37 p.m. for the first pitch, including Saturdays, and then 3:07 on Sundays. And there's still no decision on where they're going to play. Let's start off with the times. Do you guys think that those are appropriate game times? Do you think they should maybe be playing a little later so that people can watch? Or do you think the time change doesn't really play a factor at all in how many people are going to watch the Jays and how long that the season's going to last before they have to fold?
I don't really care about the times. I think 6:30 is pretty good. Like, they normally play their games at like 7:05, 7:07, so it's only bumped up like half an hour. So I don't think it's going to change too much. And then on the weekends, it's normally, I think last season they played all of their Saturday games around 4:00 or 3:30. So a Sunday game at that time doesn't bother me as well. I think, it's not going to decrease the amount of viewers. I don't think it has any effect, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with Aiden on that. I don't watch a ton of baseball throughout the regular season. I'm more of a playoff watcher and playoff viewer. So really, the time doesn't make a difference for me. So I don't think it should be a problem, especially for baseball viewers and fans here in Toronto. Maybe it'll be a problem for other fans from different time zones, whether they're in Canada or America or somewhere else in the world. But for me personally, it's not an issue.
Yeah, I understand that, and it's fully reasonable. Quickly, because I think we should sort of speed this up because we have been going for 2 hours. Probably only like an hour or so for the call, but we don't want to take up too much of Daniel's evening. Where do you think that the Jays should play? Do you think that they should play in Buffalo, Dunedin, or Toronto? And if they play in Toronto, how do you want that system to work so that people aren't put at risk with the players and staff coming from the US to Canada constantly? Let's start with you, Daniel, actually, for a first time. We'll give Aiden a little break.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't too sure about my answer, so.
I'm actually on the same board. It's a really good question, and it's something I've never even thought about, nor have I even thought about the possibilities or the logistics of all of this. But I think as fans and even people working in the MLB, it's something they got to consider given the well-being and the health of the players and the staffs and all the organizations that make the MLB. For the I guess for the Jays specifically, I'll just say based on what I know personally, which isn't a lot in comparison to other people, but I think it's probably best if they play in Toronto, just given the numbers and what I know about our situation, because I don't know about every other city in the MLB and how they're doing with COVID. Um, in terms of playing, though, maybe they can do what the NHL is doing, with keeping players self-isolated and maybe keeping them in hotel rooms where each player will have their own room. That way they are self-quarantining to a certain degree and, to remain safe. Other than that, really, that's really all I have on hand with a question, but it's a good question nonetheless, and it's something that we should all think of.
It's something that their own teams don't even know.
Yeah.
Their leagues don't even know yet. So
Yeah.
it's a difficult question. If it were me to give Aiden more time to think, I'd like to see them play in Buffalo because New York State and New York specifically have handled the virus after the initial outbreak in New York, which was pretty bad, very well. They're one of the few states who have actually had declining numbers. So I'd be comfortable with them in Buffalo. They're only 2 hours drive from Toronto, worst case scenario, and you don't have to deal with the potential of having to cross the border constantly and what that might entail. And I think it's a lot safer for Ontario and for citizens in Canada and Ontario because it keeps people out of the airports from the states for non-essential travel, because sports are not essential when you could be playing them in the states just as well, in my opinion. That's where I fall on this. I think Buffalo is the best option for them, and they still have their own facilities. That's also coming from a very selfish perspective, because I'd rather it not be in Canada, because I don't want the risk of the cases exploding in Canada because of baseball or hockey, which we'll get into later, but I don't think hockey is that much of a risk. Yeah, like Aiden, where do you sort of stand on this? Because on one side you have Toronto, where it's safe for the players and they're home and they know everything here. But on the other hand, you have the potential for other teams to bring COVID back to Canada. Where are you before we sort of end the call and jump into hockey? Because hockey, we got a lot to talk about.
Yeah. I think as a baseball fan and as a fan of the Jays, I think I would obviously want to see them play in Toronto, be at the Rogers Center and playing baseball there. But I think in terms of safety and the pandemic and everything, it is the smarter decision to play in Buffalo because you're in the same country as all the other teams. So there's no going back and forth in between the borders. And I think, like Connor said, the cases there are better. And I know the cases here in Toronto are good as well, but you never know if you have all those players coming into a new city every 3 days potentially. Something could go wrong. But yet again, like that could happen even in the US, like traveling from city to city as well. I think the MLB might start off playing the Jays in Toronto though. I think I think since they're already doing their training camp there, they might just want to prolong that and keep them in Toronto as long as possible. But I do think that they'll use the Buffalo Bison's stadium and facilities as like a safety net. Like if anything goes wrong, if they see the situation going south, the Jays are headed straight to Buffalo. I think that's kind of how I see it happening. I don't think they would just send the Jays to Toronto just for training camp when the season starts in less than 20 days, right? So I think I can see a situation where they start in Toronto, and then if something, goes wrong, then they'll go to Buffalo.
Yeah. I think that's realistic. It depends on how long I think baseball lasts, which I'm going to ask you in a second. But quickly, because we forgot to mention this, Nick Markakis, King Felix, and David Price have all opted out. So we'll see what happens.
It's so disappointing as a fan. Like even like Felix Hernandez, I know he's not like what he used to be, but that guy used to be one of the best pitchers in the game. And David Price, he just gets traded to a new team. We want to see how he does on LA, and he can't help them out. And the biggest name that I put in the doc, Mike Trout, the best player in baseball, he might not play. So like that's a lot of, fans for the Los Angeles Angels gone. They're not going to be paying attention at all to their season because he was their best player. And if your best player isn't playing, why watch? So that's going to be really disappointing for baseball fans if he doesn't play. But you can't blame the guy, to be honest. You can't blame him.
No, it's the same situation as in the MLS. I know I keep tying it back to soccer, but Carlos Vela has opted out. He's the best player in MLS by a mile. He chose not to compete in this tournament because his wife is pregnant right now, and he wants to be there for the birth of his child, and he thinks it's safer to be with his family. And does anybody blame him? No. Vancouver had 4 players opt out, and 2 of them were their best players in Lucas Cavallini and Freddie Montero. Joe St. Ricketts also opted out on Vancouver. So it's not out of the question for the good players to opt out, as you've seen in baseball. And I wouldn't be surprised to see that last longer than we've thought it will. I want to ask one question before we end this talk, and I don't want an explanation. I just want a number. How many games do you think baseball plays this season? I'll go first to give you guys some time to think. I'm thinking they don't get past 20. And by that I mean per team, if that makes sense. So 20 per team. So they get a third of the way through their season. Where do you guys sit on how many games are left before we have to end this call, because we only have 2 minutes left?
I'm going to say 3.
3 games. Okay.
3 games.
Daniel?
Yeah.
I'll answer your first one. I think they'll play at least 40. I may sound naive, maybe delusional, I don't know, but I just have a feeling that they could play 60 games. Who knows? But I do think they will play at least 40. I think they'll find a way. But again, I could be wrong, and I wouldn't put it past me if I was wrong, but I'll say a minimum of 40 games.
And can I explain a little bit why I said 3? I said 3 because that's going to be the end of the first series. So I think after the first series is played, things are going to go completely wrong, and they're going to have to shut it down.
I said 20 because that's past the 14-day window.
That's a good.
I think
good
they're going to
one.
try to
That's
push it
one.
a little bit, push the envelope, because the MLB is incredibly stupid. And they get to 20 and they realize, oh crap, we have a problem on our hands.
Yep.
But let's stop talking about the coronavirus in baseball, and we'll talk about it instead with hockey in 1 second. All right, let's move on from talking baseball, COVID, as I just mentioned, and talk about hockey COVID, because hockey is getting closer to returning to play. This week, this weekend, the NHL and NHLPA came to an agreement, or a memorandum of understanding is the fancy word for it. I'll just call it an MOU from now on because that's way easier. Around return to play rules, the formatting, everything that had to do with the hub cities, as well as a new CBA extension, which is huge. Now, we're not going to get huge into the CBA because we don't necessarily know everything about it yet. We'll know more once it's been ratified. Hopefully Friday. The vote starts today after the executive committee pushed it through to the general vote. And that takes 72 hours. So we'll hopefully know Friday afternoon, Friday night-ish. But we'll see whether or not it gets accepted. The rumors are that it will, around 60-40. I believe I've seen a lot of experts say in terms of what they guess would happen. But we don't know yet. So we're not going to speculate or talk anything about that, even though we have done a ton of speculating instead already. Instead, let's talk about the Hub City information that we found out, which there was some really interesting stuff thrown out there. And I think we should start with stuff that's important to players the most and important to fans is opting out. Players will have 3 days to opt out after I guess I should mention, without penalty, after the initial little window of the vote, I think. So 3 days after the vote, the players will have time to say whether or not they want to go to this tournament and whether or not they want to go to the hub cities of Toronto and Edmonton, of which Edmonton will be hosting the Stanley Cup final and the conference finals. So all the teams in the East, whoever goes through, will be moved from the East hub in Toronto to the West. At that hub city, players will be allowed to have their families join them, which I think is notable because they'll finally get to see them. There will have to be a little bit of quarantining involved for the families, and they will have to get tested, but they will be able to join their fathers or husbands or boyfriends or whatever. So that's a good thing. That's something that's very positive for NHL. It's positive for the players. It's something that I think we can look forward to. Up until now, do you guys have anything you want to say around the fact that the Cup final will be in Edmonton, or the fact that players have only 3 days to opt out officially, which has to be done in a written response, I guess, to their teams? Do you have any sort of thoughts on that?
I'm just disappointed that the Leafs won't be able to win the cup on home ice. But that's all. That's all I gotta say.
The Stanley Cup can never come to Toronto. Are you insane? It's not allowed anymore. Apart from at the Hockey Hall of Fame, which is in Toronto.
True.
Scrap what I just said. I forgot about that. Daniel, you got
That's all I
anything
gotta
to add?
say.
Yeah, that's all I gotta say. Daniel, you got anything to add?
No, I'm pretty much fine with it. I think it's all fair, and I'm glad to see Toronto as one of the hub cities. Not, someone who lives in Toronto, works in Toronto, and given our COVID situation, I think it's a good enough hub city, to have games take place in. So I think it's all good, and I'm hopeful that we'll have some good hockey to see, but at the same time that everybody stay safe, and all procedures are in order, and everything is met with diligency.
Yeah, fully agree. Let's dive into some of the more fun stuff because that sort of was the boring things. Maybe other boring stuff is what would happen around the NHLPA and the NHL. From my understanding, is in order for there to be delay, suspension, cancellation, whatever like that, I basically wrote it down. So this is completely not fitting what I just said, but the simple crux I got from phase 3 potential delay, cancellation, postponement of play, etc., was probably the NHL and NHLPA can pull the plug if anything feels unsafe to them. If they think it will hurt competition of the playoffs, or if there's an uncontrolled outbreak of COVID-19, the NHL can also file a complaint with which doctors will then review to see if it's a valid complaint around their actual general safety. And if they find that it is a valid complaint, I guess, but the NHL doesn't agree with it, or they don't find it a valid complaint. The NHLPA can then go to a private arbitrator or an independent arbitrator to rule on whether or not the tournament can continue, should be suspended, should be delayed, should be canceled, whatever. And that goes for phase 3 and potentially phase 4. I believe the wording might be a little different, but that was not released by Frank Cervalli, who, if you're not following Frank Cervalli on Twitter, follow him. He has just been killing it with all of the Hub City stuff for the last couple of days. He's basically where we got all this information. Both the TSN guys and Cervalli and McKenzie have just lit Twitter on fire with everything they've been breaking. So huge props to them. I'm not going to get your takes on the phase 3 stuff because that stuff is very boring and you probably don't have any opinion on this. And frankly, I don't blame you. Let's dive into more fun stuff. If a player leaves the bubble, let's hit this. They can, or if they leave, let me rephrase this. If they leave the bubble without permission, they could face removal from the bubble, and I'd assume potential fines that could go with it, which probably not a huge fan of. But what's really notable is that if a player leaves the bubble without permission, the team could face fines or the loss of draft picks. Do you guys think that that's a fair enough loss for the teams and the players? Or do you think that there should be more to give away, I guess, or more to lose if they don't follow the rules? Daniel, let's start with you.
I think initially it's fair. I think we all have to understand and realize, which I think most of us do, that we are in some critical and tough times where the safety and well-being of players, staff, and everybody in a particular organization has to be met and accompanied for first and foremost. So I think if, players are breaking the rules or whomever it may be, yeah, I think, consequences like these, fines or, draft capital and draft picks and all of that, I think that absolutely should be in the picture because it reinforces the idea of a strict rule book put in place to ensure that everybody is playing by the same rules and nobody is getting any more free, leeway than another. And, everyone knows from the get-go that these are the rules that are laid out. And if you don't follow X, Y, and Z, well, A, B, and C could happen. And it's certainly not going to benefit your team. So I'm all for it personally.
What about you, Aiden?
Yeah, I agree with Daniel. I think, if I was a player, I guess, and if I'm considering, leaving the bubble, you got to be thinking, okay, well, if I do this, I'm going to be getting fined, which some players might be like, okay, I have the money. I can do that. I can afford to leave and I'll pay. But then because of the draft capital, it also affects the team. So I think that's the key one. They don't want to risk messing up anything with their organization. And then who knows what that's going to cause if they have to give up a draft pick. This guy might be on the trade block come next year. He might be shipped out of town. Or his career could literally be in jeopardy. So I think it's definitely a good punishment if someone does choose to leave the bubble for some reason. I hope these guys are smart enough to realize that, it's not safe to leave and they got to follow these rules. Do I think it's going to happen in the NHL? No, I don't think so. I think the hub cities are good and the players have all that accommodations and stuff that they need. I don't think they need to leave for any reason. I don't see why they would. So yeah, I'm in agreement with what Daniel said.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't really know if there's much to add to what you guys said, so I'll just sort of move on to something that I think is going to be a lot of fun. There will be no dress codes in Phase 4. As Toronto Maple Leaf fans and as people who follow William Nylander and Austin Matthews on Twitter, I am very looking forward to what they choose to wear. what are you guys looking forward to the most around that? Who do you think is going to have the best outfit, and who's just going to be absolutely dreadful and just so boring when it comes to what they wear to games and stuff? Or do you think guys will actually have fun with it?
I think the young guys are gonna have fun with it. I think the more veteran guys, like I could see a Patrick Marleau, he'd probably still come in like suit and tie, professional. And I kind of would expect most guys to still do that, just to show, like, I guess it shows a sense of respect to how important the games are. I think, like, as the games get more and more important, maybe the dress code, maybe their dress attire kind of like takes it up another notch. I don't know. In terms of what player I think is going to get creative with it, I think the guys you mentioned, Austin Matthews, Nylander, I could see like Kapanen getting really creative with it as well. So yeah.
All right. What do you think?
I'm pretty much on the same side as Aiden. The only thing I would add on to what he's saying is I think depending on what team the player plays for, they may, get creative and have fun with it. So, for example, maybe you'll see like a Matt Duchene wear a Tennessee-like outfit, right, with a cowboy hat and some cowboy boots and rock it out and have some fun with it, right? I could see, some players on the Panthers show up in a t-shirt, khaki shorts and sandals, flip flops on, right? I could see that. I could also see like a Henrik Lundqvist, who is notorious for wearing a nice sharp, really pricey suit. I could see him still, deck it out and rock that out too. He's someone who knows how to dress really well, and he was voted in the past as the best dresser in the NHL. So I could see a Henrik Lundqvist come in with a really nice suit. So I think like what Aiden's saying, I think they're all going to have fun with it in their own respective ways. And I wouldn't be surprised if, some of the players all dress kind of the same just to have fun and create more of a bonding experience and to show off the city that they're playing for. I could also see that too.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what they do. I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to see how many guys are boring and just wear suits, or, as you mentioned, wear khaki shorts and T-shirts, because I think that's going to be a very common theme. But who knows? They could have a ton of fun with it and organize something. It's up to them, really, and their creativity. But one thing that I did see that the NHL was going to do that I think was pretty cool is that while the players are in the hub cities, the NHL has offered to get groceries for the families who aren't able to travel with the players. So a player's family, say he's the primary caregiver, or maybe his wife or girlfriend is immunocompromised or something like that, no matter the situation, the NHL will go out of their way and get groceries for the player, which I think is really good. I like that. I like them going out of their way to do that. And I think it's really thinking about the players first, which from the agreement, it sounds very much like they're doing that. They're putting the players in their own rooms, and each team's going to have their own floor, where they're going to try to put a little bit of a communal area where they can have different activities they could do, whether that be like video games or something. They haven't quite publicized what each venue is going to have available to the players, but who knows? I think it's really going out of their way to do something special for the players and making it not as bad as some leagues appear to be, whether it be the WNBA or what's going on in the MLS right now. And even though that looks pretty good and I'd be kind of okay with going there, it's still interesting to see how the NHL has really gone out of its way, which I didn't expect, to make it better for their players, because past experience is anything to go off of. The NHL is not like that, and it's good to see a change of face for them. More boring stuff around different safety precautions that are being taken. Testing is going to be insane. Basically, anybody who might come into contact with a player is going to get tested. So that players are going to get tested, as I mentioned. Staff, hotel staff are going to get tested. Serving staff at restaurants and bars are going to get tested. Bus drivers are going to get tested. Everybody's going to get tested. ultimately, I believe Frank Cervalli said it'll be around 2,000 tests a day. I'm not sure if this is both hub cities or just one. I think it's both, but that's a lot of tests. That's 20,000 minimum over the time that all the teams are there.
That's going to get really annoying for the players having that thing in their nose every single day. Like, that's just going to be a pain.
Yeah, we should note that it is the nasal swab every time. So they're going to be in a bit of discomfort, probably. I think you would probably eventually get used to it,
Yeah.
but maybe not. I don't know if that's something you can get used to from the videos that have been put out online of people getting tested. It doesn't look exactly pleasant.
No.
But it's 10 seconds of discomfort for the ability to win a Stanley Cup. And
I
earn a
guess.
paycheck.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily know if they'd really complain that much about it, but who am I to know? Maybe they do. Maybe it's a massive problem and it becomes a issue down the road where players refuse to play because they have to get tested. Who knows? What else do we have to hit? Bench cleaning. During each intermission, the benches are going to get cleaned, I guess. So wiped down with disinfectant, just completely cleaned to make it as safe as possible. They'll also have little dividers in where the water bottles go to separate every player's water bottle and keep it standing up. So there's no risk of potential contamination like that, which is positive. What they've decided in terms of a player who's come in contact with or an at-risk player who's come in contact with a potential COVID case is within 6 feet of somebody for 15 minutes or more. So there's quite a bit of time and quite a distance with this player. So we'll see over whether or not that's successful. Who knows? I'll just get your guys' thoughts on everything once we've sort of wrapped it up and what you think of the whole returning to play and whether or not you think it's going to be successful. But other than that, bars is the only thing we haven't hit, and then we'll be done with NHL or NHL bubbles. And I'll get your thoughts on everything, and we can move on to the rest of the NHL and then get hot takes and take off. Bars are going to be open. They'll be available to anybody who's in the hub or in the bubble, or anybody who enters the bubble. So, as I believe it was Greg Wyshynski pointed out on Twitter, post-game parties are going to be insane at those bars. Hopefully we get a lot of footage of that. I hope they record a lot of that footage in the hub cities to make a documentary afterwards, because that would be really, really cool. And I hope the NHL grants access, but I really doubt it. Yeah, after that fast little talking that nobody even caught. What do you guys think of the hub cities and how everything's set up and the bubble? And do you think the NHL is going in a good place towards returning to play, or do you think that it's not necessarily going in the right direction? And do you think that they're doing this too soon, with players reporting to training camps on July 13th, traveling to the hub cities for July 26th, and then resuming games on August 1st? Where do you stand on everything?
In terms of if I think it's the right direction, it's really hard to say like what the right direction is, because this has never happened before. It's tough to say, but I am optimistic that this plan will work. And in terms of them starting maybe too early, I think it's a good timeline that they have set up here. You know, players have a couple more weeks before they got to travel to their hub cities, so they have time to prepare for that, because I guess they all knew it was coming at some point, but these extra 2 weeks kind of gives them a little bit more time as well. So I think it's good. And then starting in August, that's that works for me, I guess. Yeah, I don't have a problem with the timeline, and I trust what the NHL is doing. It's like Daniel even mentioned earlier, like it's a really tough time that we're living in right now. So nobody has a direct like path and way to do this. So, I'm confident that the NHL can pull this off.
Daniel, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with what Aiden's saying pretty much. I think for the most part, it's a pretty solid timeline and plan that they put in place and that they're going to implement. After reading it, I think it's clear that they've done their homework, they've done their research, they know what's going to happen in case something occurs. I personally think the start date's fine. I don't think it's too premature whatsoever. Maybe they could have waited a little bit more if they wanted to, but I think where they're starting off in August 1st to kick off the play-in series, I think that's totally fine and legitimate. So I guess we'll see how it all plays out. I think that's the big thing. Um, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are some bumps and hurdles along the way. I think that's expected given where we're at currently speaking.
Fully agree. I don't think anybody would disagree with that in terms of there will be bumps, there will be hurdles. The MLS and NWSL and every other league that's resumed hasn't shown that. I don't know what you're watching, but quickly, let's hit on the rumor or news that broke, and we'll end on very positive news. Very end, and then we'll touch a little bit on the Chicago statement, which unfortunately I don't have in front of me, but I got the gist of it. Lindy Ruff might be the next head coach of the New Jersey Devils. Kevin Weeks, I believe of now NHL Network, had reported that Lindy Ruff had been hired by the New Jersey Devils to be their next head coach after they relieved. Oh, why am I forgetting this?
Hines? Is it
Hines,
Hines?
yeah,
Yeah.
Jeff Hines. Jeff Hines,
John
I think.
John John
John
John
John.
Hines.
Hines, John,
John
yeah.
Hines. After they relieved John Hines mid-season, Ruff had been in the conversation, and Friedman has said in the past that he does appear to be a very serious candidate. Do you guys think that Lindy Ruff is the right hire for New Jersey, even with Gerard Gallant available? Although I'm unsure as to whether or not he'd be willing to go to New Jersey because I feel like he'd probably want to win more now. But where do you sort of stand on this potential hiring? Because the only person who I've seen tweet about this is Kevin Weeks, and I try to get at least two sources to confirm information publicly.
Yeah. Well, if this is, real, I think like Ruff is an established NHL head coach. Like he is an NHL head coach. Do I think he fits in with New Jersey and the young team that they have right now? I think he does for like a short amount of time. I think he can come in and kind of show these young guys like Heischer and Jack Hughes how to play the game and kind of find their way. But I don't see the Devils winning a Stanley Cup with Lindy Ruff. I think he's more of like that transitional kind of coach. He comes in for like 2 to 3 years to help these young guys get more experience. And then they'll bring in like a big name coach that can who is maybe more comfortable playing with these young guys and is more of like a next generation kind of coach, more of like that speed skill based strategy. I think Lindy Ruff is more old school. Um, so yeah, I think I see it more as like a transition into the next Devils coach eventually. I think it's inevitable.
You brought up some interesting points before we started recording, Daniel. So bring those back up again, because I think what you said is very interesting. And where do you sort of stand on this hiring for the Devils? Do you think it's good hiring or bad hiring?
Personally, I think it's the wrong decision. I've always been a fan of Lindy Ruff, especially during his days in Buffalo. But we have to realize those were quite a few years ago. Those that was 10 plus years ago. That was over 10 years ago. And I think the game has passed Lindy Ruff now. As Aiden mentioned, he's an old school coach, and the game has progressed, and it's a newer game than what Lindy Ruff is used to back when he was a player once upon a time, and even as a coach during his early to mid days. Now, in terms of the hiring itself, I think when you have a guy like Gallant available and considering what he's about and the systems that he implements, I really think you can't pass him up for a guy like Lindy Ruff. I think Lindy Ruff at this stage is more of an assistant coach at best for a middle pack, maybe bottom end team. I don't even think he would cut it for a top team, just based on where he's at in his career and where the game currently is. But I think based on what Gallant has done with the Vegas Golden Knights and even with the Florida Panthers during his short stint there and getting them to the playoffs with a fairly young core and even getting the best out of a guy like Jonathan Huberdeau, who those two had quite the relationship back in juniors, back with the St. John Sea Dogs. I think Gallant would be quite a fit for guys like Jack Hughes and guys like Nico Hischier. And I think even if he's not there to witness a potential Stanley Cup, I think he could get them in the playoffs much quicker than a transitional coach at the very best in Lindy Ruff.
I think it's interesting that you bring up Horacek. I think a name that we have sort of forgotten is Bruce Boudreau's available. Although he's probably going to be the next Leafs assistant coach. So we'll see what happens there. I'm interested in the signing. I think it's interesting. I don't necessarily believe Gerard Gallant would have gone to the Devils. I think he'd rather go to a team where he could win, whether that be a Calgary in the off season if they don't stick with, I believe it's Green, something Green. I can't remember. Whoever they have filling in, because obviously they had to let go of their coach due to him using racial slurs and hitting players. But I don't necessarily see this as a bad hiring for the Devils. I think this works for them, and I think it's pretty positive. We are running out of time, so quickly, what the Blackhawks said is they basically issued a statement where they announced kind of, that their name isn't necessarily supposed to be bad. It was supposed to honor First Nations person who fought in a war and was very valiant, I guess, and respected and did some very incredible things. And that's sort of what they were trying to honor, and they've tried to do that throughout their past. If you want to look up his story, his name is Blackhawk. So that's available to you. I find this tough. I think they might need to change their logo, but maybe they don't. I think that's for the experts to decide. I like their statement. I thought their statement was good. You can look it up. It's on their Twitter if you want to see it. And that's all we're really going to say on that because we are running out of time. Let's end on some positive news because it feels like a lot of news has not been positive recently. Oscar Lindblom recently, and by recently I mean this season, was diagnosed with cancer. And this past week, he rang the bell. He finished his last chemotherapy session. So he started training again with Philadelphia, and hopefully he'll be back for the bubble. I don't know if he will, but it's just good to see him do well. And anytime somebody has to go through that, you think of them and you know that they're going through a very difficult time in their life, and he's conquered it by getting through the chemotherapy. So congratulations, Oscar. We're all thinking of you. Yeah. I don't know. Let's finish off this podcast because my voice is dying.
Yeah.
Hot takes. I haven't thought of one. Have either of you thought of your hot take? Because Aiden, you already wasted a perfectly hot take earlier.
I've already given 2 good hot takes. I said the MLB would finish their season in 3 games, and I said the Mahomes winning more Super Bowls than Brady. The third one. Anybody else have one first?
Daniel, do you have one?
Off the top of my head, I think my hot take is going to be I think Sergei Bobrovsky is going to channel his inner Tampa Bay series performance, and he's going to steal a couple series potentially for the Florida Panthers.
That's pretty good, especially after
sick.
his absolutely dreadful season this year.
Mhm.
I like that hot take. That's actually really good. I should say my hot take from last week completely fell on its face of prediction that the NHL will get ratified this
okay.
past weekend. So I've basically said every time that basically what I've said, the opposite thing has happened every time. So I'm going to say that every hub city is going to be a complete disaster and hockey will be canceled after 2 weeks.
Okay, cool.
I think that's a possibility, actually.
Really?
No jinx, but I think that's realistic. Yeah.
I think, anything is up for grabs now. I think it's not. I could see it happening. I could see it happening with any league.
This is the one hot take I don't want to be true.
Okay, I have a hot take. I have to make it as hot as the other ones, so I think this is pretty hot. Toronto Maple Leafs. They have actually. I can't say this because I already predicted that they'd win the cup. I was gonna say that they get bounced in the first round.
Well, then you're going to be right either way.
True. No, I'm not.
From now on, my hot take is going to be the Leafs win in the first round, the Leafs win in the second round, the Leafs win in the third round, the Leafs win in the fourth round,
True.
the Leafs lose in the first round, and so on and so forth.
Yes.
And you'll never be wrong.
I think there's a report that there's a chance that the guy that they just signed, Lettinen, on defense, and is it Barabanov? Barabanov? I think they might get a chance to play. I think Barabanov is going to step in right away and be a top 6 on the Leafs. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. If he's allowed to play, I think by maybe the second game of the Columbus series, he's in the top 6.
Wow. That's a hot take, especially if they aren't allowed to play.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's end this podcast because we've been going for quite a while and taken a lot of time out of Daniel's evening by saying thank you. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. Good to get to know you a little bit more. And yeah, thanks for coming on. It was really interesting to hear about the Florida stuff, the MLSE stuff. So hopefully you don't get in trouble for leaking all of the MLSE secrets behind the scenes. But yeah, with that, thank you for listening. We will hopefully be back next week, but there's not a guarantee. I may not be able to record. We're not 100% sure yet. You may have a podcast that's recorded over the weekend and then released later in the week, which would not be up to date. But we'll see what happens. Thank you for listening. Check me out on Twitter at CWG Somerville. Aiden, where can they check you out?
Check me out on Instagram at Aiden Silifan. Check out my other podcasts as well at Unlimited Pod. And Daniel, what about you? Where can they find you? And you have any last words of wisdom for our viewers?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at my personal page. That's at Danny Janicas, Janicas. And you can also find me on my site's Twitter page. That's at Fansided the Rat. My words of wisdom, so to speak, was to, everybody needs to keep persevering, keep an open mind, follow the rules, of course, stay safe. But we're all in this together, so to speak. And I think we'll all get through this as media members, as industry professionals, and as human beings all together.
And wear an effing mask. Please, for the love of God, wear an effing mask. With that, you can check out my podcast. We put up a really special episode this morning where we got, as I roll off screen, where we got all of the contributors and writers for MLS Multiplex, which is a section of Fansided covering MLS, to predict how they think their team's going to do in the tournament. MLS is back tournament, I guess, which started tonight. So you can go check that out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, all those places. Thank you for listening. We will see you next week, maybe. If not, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.